His solicitor leaned in and whispered 5 words, just 5 words, and Lachlan's face, that smug, self-satisfied face I had stared at across the breakfast table in our Vaucluse mansion for 15 years, went completely white. His hands started trembling. The legal papers he had been so eager to sign were shaking like gum leaves in a violent storm. And me, for the first time in 3 years, Matilda Patterson smiled. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how a woman everyone thought had lost her mind actually played the longest, most patient game of her life. My name is Matilda Patterson. My friends call me Tilly. I am 34 years old. And until 3 months ago, I was married to Lachlan Sterling. 15 years of marriage. That is longer than most celebrity relationships. Longer than some small countries have existed. And definitely longer than my patience should have lasted. But I am a stubborn woman. I get that from my grandmother. I met Lachlan when I was 17. I had graduated from high school early and was working as a filing clerk at Blackwood and Hart, a prestigious law firm in the city. Lachlan was 24, charming, ambitious, and full of dreams about building a real estate empire in Sydney. He talked about the future like it was already his property. He said he was going to build something incredible. I said I would help him file the paperwork. We got married when I was 19. Our son Jack came along when I was 20. I became his unpaid everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, interior decorator for model homes, and marketing coordinator. My official title was wife. My unofficial title was everything else. For 11 years, I poured myself into building Lachlan's dream. And for 11 years, he got the credit, the awards, and the recognition. Somewhere along the way, things shifted. He started criticizing the little things, the way I dressed, the meals I cooked, my supposed lack of ambition. Then 3 months ago, he dropped the bombshell. He came home on a Tuesday evening to our waterfront home in Vaucluse. He sat me down at the marble kitchen island with a look on his face that was strictly business. I want a divorce, Lachlan said. And I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. Then he paused, looking at his fingernails. You can keep Jack. He said it like he was ordering from a menu. I will have the assets. Hold a child. Thanks. He spoke about our 15-year-old son like Jack was an inconvenience he was graciously allowing me to take away. I just stared at him. 15 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. At our kitchen table, treating me like an expired item he was discarding. What I did not know in that moment was that Lachlan had been planning this for months with his expensive solicitor, Jeffrey Abbott. He had been building his exit strategy while I was scheduling his dentist appointments. The next day, his mother showed up. Margaret Sterling, a woman who had treated me like a hired help for 15 years, arrived with her perfectly styled hair and her practiced sympathy. She patted my hand and told me I should have tried harder to keep him happy. Men have needs, dear, Margaret said, as if she were explaining quantum physics to a toddler. That first week was a blur. Lachlan moved me to the guest room. Everyone saw a woman whose world had just collapsed, a victim who did not see it coming. But within 2 weeks, he started bringing her around. Chloe Fisher, 27 years old. She worked at his company, of course. She had that Instagram perfect look. Blonde highlights, perfect nails, and activewear that cost more than my weekly groceries. Chloe walked into my kitchen like she owned the title deed. She wore my apron, my grandmother's apron, while making green smoothies in my blender. Lachlan paraded her around like a trophy. They would sit on my couch, watch my television, and eat off my dinner plates. The humiliation escalated daily. First, he cancelled my personal credit card, then the joint bank card. Then he suggested I should probably find somewhere else to stay while we sorted things out. I was being asked to leave my own home. Margaret came over to help me pack. And by help, I mean she went through my belongings and decided what I deserved to keep. Old clothes? Fine, Margaret said, tossing them into a pile. Family photos? Some of them. When I reached for the jewellery box containing pieces Lachlan had given me over 15 years, Margaret's hand snapped out. No, Matilda, she said sharply. Those are marital assets. Lachlan is entitled to them. She packed my things in black garbage bags. Not boxes, garbage bags. like I was rubbish being taken out to the curb. The worst part was not Lachlan. It was not Margaret. It was not even Chloe. The worst part was Jack. My son saw everything. He saw a girlfriend. He saw a grandmother packing his mother's bags. He saw the way his father looked at me like I was nothing. Lachlan had been dripping poison in Jack's ear. "Your mother is making this difficult," he would say. "I am trying to be fair, but she will not cooperate." But on the day we left, standing in the grand foyer of the Vaucluse mansion, Jack did not look confused. He looked at his father, who was too busy typing on his mobile phone to say goodbye. He looked at the garbage bags in my hands. "I have got this, Mum," Jack said, his voice deep with a maturity he should not have needed yet. He took the heavy bags from my hands. We walked out the front door, past Chloe's shiny European convertible parked in the driveway. I did not look back at the harbour view. I did not look back at the life I had built. I just held the door of my old sedan open for my son, and we drove away. Everyone thought I was broken. Everyone thought I was leaving with nothing. They were wrong. Everyone saw a woman whose world had just collapsed. They saw a wife being thrown away after 15 years of service. They saw a victim who did not see it coming. But here is the thing about being underestimated. People stop watching you. They stop being careful around you. They stop guarding their secrets. And that is exactly when you learn everything you need to know. We moved into a small unit in Marrickville, a suburb in the inner west of Sydney. It was a far cry from the waterfront mansion in Vaucluse. The carpet was threadbare. The tap in the bathroom dripped rhythmically, and every 20 minutes, the roar of an aeroplane flying overhead would shake the window frames. But for the first time in years, the air felt breathable. Half of our boxes did not even fit. They sat stacked in the corner of Jack's room like a monument to how far we had fallen. Meanwhile, Lachlan posted photographs on social media with Chloe. "New chapter, new energy, blessed," he wrote. Margaret commented underneath, "So happy for you, sweetheart. You deserve joy." My sister called me, furious. "You need a shark solicitor, Tilly. Take him for everything he is worth." Everyone had advice. Everyone thought they knew what I should do. Everyone saw a woman who had given up, who could not fight, who was letting her husband walk all over her. Everyone was wrong. 3 years. That is how long I had been carrying this secret. That is how long I had known the truth about Lachlan Sterling and his glittering, glamorous, completely fake empire. It started on a random Tuesday night, 3 years before the divorce. Lachlan was working late again. He was always working late by then, though I did not yet know what that really meant. I was going through the company ledgers, reconciling accounts, doing the unglamorous work that kept his business running, and I found something strange. A transfer to an account I did not recognize, then another, then a pattern. Money was flowing out of our accounts into places I had never seen before. I dug deeper. I stayed up until 3 a.m, following the trail of digital breadcrumbs. What I found made my blood run cold. Lachlan had been taking loans against everything we owned. The house, our beautiful Vaucluse home that everyone admired, had 3 mortgages on it. There was the original loan, a second mortgage taken out 4 years ago, a third mortgage taken out 2 years ago. The actual value of the house was perhaps $2 million in a good market. The total debt owed to the banks was nearly $2.5 million. We were underwater by $500,000 on a home I thought we owned outright. The business was even worse. Lines of credit were maxed out. There were back taxes owed to the Australian Taxation Office. There were vendor debts and equipment loans. The company Lachlan bragged about at every cocktail party. The company that was supposedly thriving was drowning in debt. I sat in my kitchen at 3 a.m, surrounded by printouts, and I did the mathematics. Total debt, approximately $4 million. Total actual asset value, maybe $3.5 million. But where had all the money gone? I kept digging. Over the following weeks, I traced every transaction. The picture that emerged was devastating. Cryptocurrency investments, all lost. Gambling debts, significant amounts transferred to betting agencies, and lifestyle expenses that never made it home. Watches, suits, and trips I was never invited on. My husband was not building an empire. He was building a house of cards. We looked rich the same way a mannequin looks alive. convincing from a distance, but completely hollow up close. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to demand answers, but I knew Lachlan. I had watched him operate for years. If I confronted him, he would manipulate me. He would explain it away. He would make me feel crazy for questioning him. And worse, if he knew that I knew, he might try to take control of my separate money, too. You see, I had always kept a little something of my own. My grandmother's voice was always in my head. A woman should have her own money, Matilda. Not secret money, just her own. I had my superannuation from my years at the law firm, and I had the inheritance my grandmother left me when she passed away. She had been specific in her will. This money is for Matilda Patterson alone. I had roughly $520,000 that was completely, legally, separately mine. So I did not confront Lachlan. Instead, I protected myself. I worked with my uncle, a retired accountant, to create an irrevocable trust fund for Jack. My inheritance and my savings went into that trust. My name was not on it as a beneficiary. Lachlan's name certainly was not on it. It was for Jack's future, university, a first home, emergencies, and it was untouchable. Then I documented everything. Every mortgage document, every hidden account, every suspicious transaction. I printed copies and kept them at my sister's house. I put copies in a safe deposit box. I saved everything on an encrypted drive. And then I waited. I knew Lachlan would leave eventually. Men like him always do. They get bored, or they find someone younger, or they decide they deserve more applause. I just had to be ready when it happened. Back in the present, in our tiny unit in Marrickville, I opened a can of paint. Sage green. Chloe had painted my old kitchen a cold industrial grey. She had covered over the warmth I had tried to build. But here, in this rental, the landlord said we could paint the walls if we wanted. Jack walked in, holding a paintbrush. He looked at the colour and smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen on his face in weeks. "It looks like home, Mum," he said. I dipped my brush into the paint. "Yes, it does," I replied. Lachlan thought he had won. He thought he had taken the prize. He did not realize that he had fought tooth and nail for the captain's chair on the Titanic just after it had hit the iceberg. The next 3 months were a masterclass in acting. I became exactly what everyone expected me to be, broken, defeated, and barely holding on. I showed up to mediation sessions with red eyes and trembling hands. I spoke softly, hesitantly, like a woman who had lost all her confidence. I asked for so little that even the independent mediator seemed uncomfortable. "I just want enough to start over," I said during our second mediation session at a sterile office in the Sydney Central Business District. "I am not trying to be difficult. I know the business is his life's work. I know the house means everything to him. I do not want to tear our family apart more than it already is. I requested a settlement of $50,000 in cash, my personal belongings, and shared custody of Jack." That was it. Lachlan agreed immediately. He was probably expecting me to fight for half of everything. That is what any reasonable solicitor would demand. Instead, I was asking for crumbs. He looked at me across that mahogany table with something almost like pity. As if I were a wounded animal he was graciously putting out of its misery. I deserved an Academy Award for that performance. I was given the role of a lifetime. My only audience was my lying, arrogant, soon-to-be bankrupt ex-husband. With each passing week, Lachlan's arrogance grew. He stopped being careful. He stopped pretending to be the reasonable one. He started telling everyone who would listen that I had not even fought. "She just gave up," he told his friends at the Royal Sydney Golf Club. I offered her a fair settlement, and she took it without a word. To celebrate his upcoming victory, Lachlan bought himself a new watch, a Swiss timepiece worth $15,000. I know this because I saw the charge on the business account statement before my access was cut off. He was still using company money for personal expenses, still digging that hole deeper. He wore it to our next meeting, making sure I noticed the gold glinting under the fluorescent lights. Meanwhile, Chloe Fisher had started redecorating my old house. New furniture arrived in the living room. New abstract art replaced my family portraits on the walls. My friend Beck Jones kept calling me. fishing for information under the guise of friendship. I played along perfectly. How are you holding up, Tilly? She would ask, her voice dripping with fake concern. I just wanted to be over, Beck, I would tell her, making my voice crack slightly. I cannot fight anymore. I do not have the energy. Within hours, Lachlan would know. I could practically see him relaxing, letting his guard down even further. Beck thought she was playing me. She was actually just a messenger service, and not a very expensive one either. But while the adults were playing their games, Jack was watching. My son, my smart, observant, wonderful son, was starting to notice things that did not add up. He noticed his father's new $15,000 watch, but he also heard Lachlan tell him they could not afford the school excursion to Canberra. It is a tough quarter for the business mate, Lachlan had told him. Maybe next year. Every student in Year 9 goes to Canberra to visit Parliament House. It is a rite of passage for Australian students. And the great property tycoon, Lachlan Sterling, could not find $300 for the bus fare and accommodation. Jack noticed Chloe's shopping bags piling up in the foyer, but he heard his father complain about money being tight whenever Jack needed new rugby boots. He noticed the disconnect between the lifestyle his father was projecting and the excuses he kept making. One evening, Jack came to our tiny unit in Marrickville. He sat down at our second-hand kitchen table, which I had sanded and varnished myself. He looked at me with those serious eyes, so much like his father's, but filled with a kindness Lachlan had lost long ago. Honesty, Mum, he said quietly. Is Dad actually rich? I looked at my son for a long moment. I did not want to burden him, but I respected him too much to lie. What do you think, Jack? I asked. He was quiet, processing the last few months. He looked around our small, warm apartment, then thought about the cold, empty mansion in Vaucluse. I think something's not right, Jack said slowly. I think he's pretending. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Trust your instincts, Jack, I said. Just wait a little longer. Everything will make sense soon. My 15-year-old son had figured out something was wrong before 2 expensive lawyers and a certified accountant did. I should have billed his future university fund for consulting fees. Behind the scenes, my solicitor, Claudia Rossi, was preparing our legal strategy with surgical precision. The main divorce agreement stated clearly that I was relinquishing all claims to marital property. The house, the business, the vehicles, everything would go to Lachlan. But attached to that agreement was an addendum, a detailed liability disclosure statement. Every debt, every mortgage, every loan, every obligation tied to those assets was listed there. When Lachlan signed for the assets, he would be legally assuming all liabilities. The mortgages would become his sole responsibility. The business debts would transfer entirely to him. The lease obligations on luxury cars would be his problem alone. It was all there in black and white, legal, proper, and devastating. Legal documents are like poetry, Matilda, Claudia told me in her office, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. Boring, expensive poetry that can ruin someone's life. My favourite kind. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Jeffrey Abbott, Lachlan's solicitor, called Claudia with concerns. My client is assuming significant assets, Jeffrey said carefully. I would like to request a full financial audit before we finalise, just to verify the valuations. Claudia kept her voice neutral. Of course, we will provide whatever documentation you need. But when Jeffrey brought this to Lachlan, my soon-to-be ex-husband shut it down immediately. I heard about the conversation later from a secretary at their firm who liked me more than she liked Lachlan. No audits, Lachlan had told Jeffrey. I built that company. I know exactly what it is worth. I'm not paying for some accountant to tell me what I already know. Just get it done. Chloe wants this finalised before the summer holidays. Jeffrey had been practicing law for over 30 years. He knew when a client was about to make a mistake. He also knew he could not force someone to take his advice. He presented Lachlan with a waiver, a document acknowledging that his solicitor had recommended an independent financial review, and that Lachlan was declining against counsel's advice. Lachlan signed it without reading it, just like he signed everything else without reading it. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now we just had to wait for the steel jaws to snap shut. Thursday, April 17th. 9 a.m., courtroom 4B. I remember every detail of that morning. The way the autumn sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the dust boats dancing in the air. The smell of old wood and floor polish. The quiet murmur of solicitors shuffling their paperwork. This was where 15 years of marriage would officially end, and where 3 years of patience would finally pay off. Lachlan arrived first. Of course, he was wearing his best charcoal suit, the one I had helped him choose for a client dinner 3 years ago. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man about to close a very favorable property deal. Chloe was not allowed inside the courtroom, but I had seen her in the hallway, scrolling through her telephone and looking bored. Margaret was there too, sitting in the public gallery. She had dressed up for the occasion, wearing a hat that was far too large for a courtroom, probably planning to take her son to a celebratory luncheon afterwards. She looked at me when I walked in and gave me a tight little smile, the kind you give to a servant you have just dismissed. I arrived a few minutes after Lachlan. I wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry, and my hair was pulled back in a low bun. I looked tired. I looked defeated. I looked exactly like a woman who had nothing left to fight for. Judge Fiona Cleary entered, and everyone rose. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She had spent 30 years on the bench of the family court of Australia. She had seen every trick, every manipulation, and every lie that divorcing couples could throw at each other. Nothing surprised her anymore. Sterling versus Sterling, she announced, reviewing the file. Final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached an agreement. Geoffrey Abbott, Lachlan's solicitor, stood up. Yes, Your Honour. My client, Mr. Lachlan Sterling, is assuming all marital assets, including the family residence in Vaucluse, the real estate development business, and all associated vehicles. In exchange, Mrs. Matilda Patterson receives a cash settlement of $50,000. My solicitor, Claudia Rossi, rose beside me. That is correct, Your Honour. My client agrees to relinquish all claims to these assets and accepts the proposed settlement terms. Judge Cleary's eyes moved to me. She studied my face for a long moment, looking for signs of coercion. Mrs. Patterson, she said, I need to confirm that you understand what you're agreeing to today. You're giving up your claim to substantial property, a family home, the business you helped build. Are you certain this is what you want? I kept my voice soft, slightly unsteady. Yes, Your Honour, I understand. And you are entering this agreement voluntarily? No one is pressuring you? No, Your Honour. I looked down at my hands, then back up at her. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this to be over. Very well, the judge said finally. Let us proceed. The court clerk distributed the final documents. Page after page of legal language, requiring signatures on every third page. Lachlan signed eagerly. He barely glanced at what he was agreeing to. He wanted this done. He wanted to get back to his new life, his new girlfriend, and his new freedom. I signed slowly, deliberately. Every stroke of my pen was careful and precise. This was the moment I had been waiting 3 years for. I was going to savor it. Across the courtroom, I saw Lachlan glance at Margaret and wink. She nodded back approvingly. Meanwhile, Geoffrey Abbott was doing what good solicitors do, reviewing the complete document package one final time. He flipped through the main agreement, the asset schedule, and the settlement terms. Then he reached the addendum, the liability disclosure statement. I watched his face as he read. I watched the confusion flicker across his features. I watched him flip back a page, then forward again, as if he hoped he had misread something. He had not. Geoffrey's face went pale. He leaned toward Lachlan, trying to be discreet. Lachlan, he whispered urgently, we need to talk. Lachlan waved him off, still basking in his victory. Not now, Geoffrey. We are almost done. Sir, Geoffrey's voice was sharper this time. You are assuming all the debt. Lachlan turned to look at him, annoyed. What? The liability disclosure, Geoffrey whispered, the papers rustling as he pointed a shaking finger. The mortgages, the business liens, the tax debts. It is all here. You are assuming personal liability for everything. For the first time, Lachlan actually looked at what he had signed. I watched his eyes scan the numbers. I watched the color drain from his face. Family residence, $1.1 million owed. Market value, significantly lower. Business debts, $480,000 in combined liabilities. Vehicle leases, $115,000. Additional personal liabilities, $200,000. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Net value of the empire he had just claimed, negative $300,000. He had not won the lottery. He had won the bill for it. Lachlan stood up, abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. This is not right. He looked at me, then at the judge, then back at the papers. She hid this from me. This is fraud. Judge Cleary's voice was sharp. Mr. Sterling, sit down. These numbers are fake, Lachlan insisted, his voice rising to a shout. She manipulated the documents. This is Mr. Sterling. The judge's tone left no room for argument. Sit down. He sat, but his hands were shaking. His confident smile was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like panic. Judge Cleary looked at the documents in front of her, then at Lachlan. Mr. Sterling, I am looking at the liability disclosure statement attached to this agreement. These are debts associated with assets you are claiming, assets in your name, your business, your property. She fixed him with a hard stare. Are you telling this court that you do not know your own financial situation? Silence. Watching Lachlan try to explain why he did not know about his own debts was fascinating. It was like watching a child try to explain how the biscuit jar broke while holding a hammer. Geoffrey cleared his throat, looking miserable. Your Honor, I should note that I advised my client to conduct an independent financial review prior to this hearing. He declined. I have documentation. He produced the waiver, the one Lachlan had signed, without reading. Judge Cleary reviewed it briefly. So Mr. Sterling was advised to verify these figures. He chose not to. He signed a waiver acknowledging that choice. She looked at Lachlan. Is that correct? Lachlan was staring at the waiver like it was a venomous snake and had just bitten him. I thought. Is that your signature, Mr. Sterling? A long pause. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Yes, he whispered. Then you assumed this risk voluntarily, Judge Cleary said, her voice matter-of-fact. You had the opportunity to investigate. You chose not to. The agreement stands. Lachlan turned to me, desperation breaking through his composure. You knew, he said, his voice cracking. You knew about all of this. I met his eyes calmly. I did not blink. I was your bookkeeper for 11 years, Lachlan, I said. I knew about everything. His face cycled through emotions faster than I could count. Confusion, rage, betrayal, fear, and finally, the one I had been waiting for, realization, the understanding that he had done this to himself. I want to withdraw the agreement, Lachlan said, turning back to the judge. I did not understand what I was signing. This is not fair, Judge Cleary shook her head. She picked up her gavel. Mr. Sterling, you signed documents before this court, stating you understood and agreed to all terms. You were represented by competent counsel. You declined additional review. Your wife didn't hide anything. These are your debts, your mortgages, your obligations. She paused, looking him dead in the eye. The agreement is final. Bang. The gavel came down. Mrs. Patterson, you have your settlement. Mr. Sterling, you have the assets, as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and picked up my handbag. Then I looked at Lachlan one last time. He was slumped in his chair, papers scattered in front of him, his whole world collapsing around him. You said you wanted everything except Jack, I said quietly. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, outside courtroom 4B, I could hear Lachlan's voice rising, shouting at Geoffrey Abbott about fairness and fraud. But through the glass doors, I saw Chloe Fisher's face change as she listened. I saw her look at Lachlan and finally see something other than the successful property developer she thought she had caught. Chloe was gone before I even reached the elevator. Her exit was faster than her entrance into my marriage. At least she was consistent. I stepped outside into the bright Sydney sunshine. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. The air was warm. Behind me, my ex-husband was screaming at his solicitor. Ahead of me was a new life. It was smaller than before, yes, but it was entirely mine. The collapse happened faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Chloe had moved out of the Vaucluse mansion. She packed her things in the middle of the night and left a note on the kitchen counter that simply said, "This is not what I signed up for." Within a month, the banks moved in like seagulls on a hot chip. Lachlan tried to sell the house, but when you owe more than a property is worth, there are no buyers. Only creditors calling about missed payments, and real estate agents suggested short sales. Within 2 months, the business started defaulting. Vendors filed lawsuits. The lines of credit were frozen. The company that Lachlan had spent 15 years building and that I had spent 11 years supporting was crumbling into dust. Lachlan Sterling, the man who once bragged about his empire, was now meeting with bankruptcy trustees, calculating which assets he could protect. The answer was almost nothing. I heard that Margaret's Christmas newsletter that year was very short. "Lachlan is exploring new opportunities in the financial sector," she wrote. Yes, opportunities in debt restructuring. Margaret tried to reach out, of course. She called Jack, asking him to pass a message to me. "Tell your mother I did not know about the money problems." She told him over the telephone. "Tell her I am sorry for how I treated her. Tell her I want to talk." Jack looked at the phone in his hand. He remembered the woman who had packed his mother's belongings in garbage bags. He remembered the woman who had called his mother worthless. "Mum is busy building her life, Grandma," Jack said calmly. "She does not have time for excuses." Margaret wanted forgiveness. I wanted peace. Guess which one of us got what we wanted? My $50,000 settlement went towards getting established. I paid the first month's rent and the security bond on our Marrickville unit. I bought basic furniture that was not falling apart. It was not luxury, but it was stability. The trust fund stayed exactly where it was. That was Jack's future. His university degree, maybe a deposit on his first home someday. It was a safety net that nobody could take from him. And as for me, I enrolled in the interior design diploma at TAFE NSW. It was the dream I had put on hold when I was 23 to help Lachlan build his business. I was finally building my own. I started small. My first real client was a woman named Sandra, a 52-year-old nurse who was just ending a 28-year marriage. She was standing in her empty new apartment in Parramatta, looking lost when she asked me, "How do you start over, Tilly?" I thought about it for a moment. "One room at a time, Sandra," I said. "One colour at a time, one day at a time." We painted her kitchen sage green. She cried when she saw it. "Happy tears," she said, "the colour of new beginnings." About 3 months after the divorce was finalised, there was a knock at my door. It was a Tuesday evening. I opened the door to find Lachlan standing in the hallway of my apartment block. I barely recognised him. He had lost weight, and not the healthy kind. There were dark circles under his eyes. His suit was wrinkled, clearly off the rack, not the tailored Italian wool he used to wear. His wrist was bare. The $15,000 watch was gone. He looked like a man who had been through a war and lost. He stood in my doorway, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I did not know it was this bad," he said, his voice raspy. "I made mistakes, Tilly. I know that now. But I did not mean for any of this to happen." I leaned against my doorframe and looked at him. Really looked at him. This was the man I had loved for almost half my life. This was the man who had thrown me away like rubbish because he thought he could do better. This was the man who was now drowning in the consequences of his own choices. "Can we talk?" he asked. Maybe we can figure something out. I do not know. Maybe we could." He could not even finish the sentence. He could not bring himself to ask for what he actually wanted. Help. My help. After everything. "You asked for everything except Jack," I said calmly. "You got exactly what you wanted, Lachlan." "Matilda, please." "Goodbye, Lachlan." I closed the door. I turned the lock. Click. I listened for a moment as his footsteps faded down the hallway. "Who was that, Mum?" Jack walked out of his bedroom, holding a textbook. He looked at the closed door, then at me. "Just a ghost," I said, smiling at him. "Someone we used to know." That evening, After Jack went to bed, I sat in my small living room. The window was open, letting in the cool evening breeze and the distant sounds of the city. I looked at the photograph of my grandmother on the shelf. Next to it was her old recipe box, the one thing Margaret had almost taken, the one thing that mattered most. You were right about everything, Grandma, I whispered. Keep your own money, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small. The apartment was quiet. It was small. It was nothing like the mansion I had lived in for 15 years. But every paint colour, every piece of furniture, every decision was mine. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, intoxicating air of Marrickville. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was free.